The dust swirled in small cyclones across the barren Nebraska street as Sarah Summers watched her husband mount their only horse, his face hard as the rocky terrain that surrounded the small frontier town of Cottonwood Creek. The year was 1875, and like many who had ventured west seeking fortune and fresh beginnings, Sarah's dreams had slowly withered under the harsh prairie sun. "Frank, please," she called, her voice cracking as he secured their meager savings to the saddle. "We can work through this." "Ain't nothing to work through," Frank Summers replied, not bothering to meet her gaze. "This town's dead, and I ain't dying with it. Gold's waiting in California, and I'm going to find it." "But what about me? How am I supposed to—" "You'll figure it out. You always do." He pulled on the reins, turning the tired mare toward the western horizon. "Maybe your pa was right. Should have never married a shopkeeper's daughter." Sarah stood frozen, the wooden porch of their small homestead creaking beneath her feet as Frank rode away, taking with him their horse, their savings, and the last 7 years of her life. She didn't call after him again. Pride kept her spine straight, even as tears threatened to spill down her sun-freckled cheeks. At 26, Sarah Summers found herself alone on the edge of nowhere, with winter approaching and no means of transportation, in a town that was slowly dying as the railroad had bypassed it for more promising settlements. 3 days later, after rationing what little food remained in her pantry, Sarah stood behind the counter of the general store where she worked, staring blankly at the inventory list. Mr. Hoffman, the elderly proprietor, watched her with concern etched in the deep lines of his weathered face. "You haven't said 10 words today, Sarah," he observed, adjusting his spectacles. "Still no word from Frank?" She shook her head, unwilling to admit aloud that her husband had abandoned her. The shame of it burned worse than the anger. "I need to get to my sister's place in Junction City," she finally said, "but without the horse." Mr. Hoffman patted her hand sympathetically. "Stagecoach comes through next week. Maybe." The bell above the door jangled, cutting off his suggestion as a tall figure stepped inside, bringing with him the scent of leather, horse, and the open plains. Sarah straightened her apron, quickly wiping away a stray tear before turning to address the customer. The man who stood before her wasn't from Cottonwood Creek. His clothes were trail-worn but of good quality, a dark blue shirt under a leather vest, denim pants tucked into well-used boots. A gun belt hung low on his hips, the holster tied down against his thigh, in the manner of men who used their weapons for more than just show. But it was his eyes that caught Sarah's attention, clear blue and direct, set in a face tanned by endless days under the sun. "Afternoon," he said, removing his hat to reveal sandy blonde hair. "I'm looking to restock some supplies before heading north." "Of course," Sarah replied automatically, professional courtesy momentarily displacing her personal troubles. "What do you need, Mr. Grant?" "Adam Grant." He placed his hat on the counter and pulled a list from his vest pocket. "I need coffee, flour, salt, ammunition for a Winchester rifle, and whatever fresh food you might have." As Sarah gathered his supplies, the stranger observed her with quiet attention. She felt his gaze and found herself standing taller, tucking a loose strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "Passing through?" Mr. Hoffman asked conversationally. "Heading to my brother's ranch near Fort Laramie," Adam replied, "taking some horses up for breeding stock." "Long journey for a man alone," the older man commented. Adam smiled slightly. "I prefer my own company most days." When all his supplies were gathered, Sarah tallied the cost. "That'll be $4.35, Mr. Grant." He paid without haggling, which was unusual enough to note. As she wrapped his purchases in brown paper, he leaned against the counter, his expression thoughtful. "There a decent place to stay in town?" he asked. "My horses could use a day's rest before we push north." "Widow Jenkins takes boarders," Sarah replied. "3 doors down, white house with blue shutters. Best meals in town, too." He nodded his thanks, collected his supplies, and settled his hat back on his head. At the door, he paused and turned back, his gaze lingering on Sarah's face. "Madam, forgive me for saying, but you look like you've had some trouble." Sarah stiffened. "I'm perfectly fine, thank you." His eyes, too perceptive by half, held hers for a moment before he nodded once and departed, the bell jangling behind him. "Observant fellow," Mr. Hoffman remarked when the door closed. "Seems decent enough?" Sarah said nothing, returning to her inventory list with forced concentration. She didn't have time to think about strangers passing through, no matter how perceptive their blue eyes might be. The following morning dawned clear and cool, with the promise of heat later in the day. Sarah woke early, as was her habit, though sleep had been elusive. Dreams of Frank riding away had plagued her, intermingled with the worry of how she would survive the coming months. Her sister had written last spring, inviting Sarah to visit, but the 60 miles to Junction City might as well have been 1,000 without transportation. After a simple breakfast, she set out for the general store, walking quickly through the quiet streets. Cottonwood Creek had once been a promising settlement, but when the railroad chose a route 20 miles south, the town had begun its slow decline. Still, it was home, the only one Sarah had known since marrying Frank at 19. She was nearly at the store when she heard the commotion-raised voices and the clatter of hooves on the hard-packed dirt of Main Street. Rounding the corner, Sarah stopped short at the sight before her. 3 men on horseback surrounded a fourth, who stood protectively in front of a string of 5 magnificent horses. Even from a distance, Sarah recognized Adam Grant, his stance wide and one hand resting on his holstered gun. "I'm telling you, Price, these horses aren't for sale," Adam was saying, his voice calm but firm. "They're promised to my brother's ranch." The man he addressed, a local cattle rancher named Samuel Price, known for his temper and ambition, leaned forward in his saddle. "And I'm telling you, I'll pay double whatever your brother's paying. I need good stock for my breeding program." The answer's still no. Adam didn't raise his voice, but there was steel in his tone. Price's face flushed with anger. "You'd be wise to reconsider, stranger. I'm not a man who takes kindly to refusal." "Neither am I," Adam replied evenly. "Now, if you gentlemen will excuse me, I've got preparations to make." The tension in the air was palpable. Sarah held her breath, watching as Price's hand twitched toward his gun. The street had emptied of other townspeople, no one wanting to be caught in potential crossfire. "Samuel Price!" Sarah called out, surprising herself as much as the men. She stepped forward, heart pounding. "Your wife was looking for you at the store yesterday. Said something about needing you home urgently." It was a lie, of course, but it served its purpose. Price hesitated, his focus broken, and glanced in Sarah's direction. The moment of potential violence passed. "This ain't over," Price growled at Adam before wheeling his horse around. His companions followed, sending up clouds of dust as they galloped away. When they were gone, Adam turned to Sarah, his expression a mixture of amusement and gratitude. "Quick thinking," he said, "though I doubt Mrs. Price was looking for him." "No," Sarah admitted, "but it seemed preferable to watching a shootout on Main Street." Adam laughed, a warm sound that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Can't argue with that logic." He gestured to the string of horses behind him, sleek, powerful animals that even Sarah could tell were exceptional. "These fellows are worth protecting, but not at the cost of bloodshed." Sarah approached cautiously, admiring the animals. "They're beautiful," she said softly, reaching out to stroke the velvety nose of a chestnut mare. The horse nickered gently, pushing against her palm. "Are they really for your brother's ranch?" "They are. He's building a reputation for breeding some of the finest horses in the territory." Pride was evident in his voice. "I spent 6 months in Kentucky selecting these." "It's a long way from Kentucky to Wyoming," Sarah remarked. "Life's a long journey," Adam replied with a slight shrug. He studied her for a moment, then asked, "Would you care to walk with me to the livery? I'd appreciate friendly company after that encounter." Sarah hesitated, aware that accepting might spark gossip in a town where everyone knew everyone's business. But something about Adam Grant's straightforward manner and the quiet respect in his eyes made her nod her agreement. "I have a few minutes before I'm due at the store," she said. They walked side by side, Adam leading the string of horses, their hooves creating a rhythmic backdrop to the quiet morning. People were beginning to emerge from their homes and businesses, casting curious glances at the pair. "You've lived here long?" Adam asked, seemingly oblivious to the attention they were attracting. 7 years, Sarah replied, "since I married." "Your husband's a lucky man." The simple statement, delivered without flirtation, sent a wave of pain through Sarah. Before she could stop herself, she blurted out, "He left 3 days ago, took our horse and savings and headed for California. Adam stopped walking, turning to face her fully. I'm sorry to hear that, he said, genuine concern in his voice. That's a hard blow. Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. I shouldn't have said anything. It's not your concern. Maybe not, he agreed, resuming their walk. But it explains the sadness I saw in your eyes yesterday. After a moment of silence, he added, What will you do now? My sister lives in Junction City. She's been after me to visit for years. I think perhaps it's time I took her up on the offer. Junction City's not close. No, Sarah acknowledged, and without a horse I'll have to wait for the stagecoach, if I can scrape together the fare. They reached the livery stable, where Adam arranged for the care of his horses. Sarah watched as he spoke with the stablemaster, his manner confident, but not overbearing. There was something about Adam Grant that spoke of a man comfortable in his own skin, neither seeking approval nor avoiding responsibility. When he finished his business, he walked Sarah back toward the general store. They stopped outside, the morning sun now casting long shadows down the street. Thank you for the company, Mrs. Summers, Adam said formally, tipping his hat. Sarah, she corrected, surprising herself again, if you're going to know my deepest troubles, you might as well use my given name. A smile touched his lips. Sarah, then, thank you. She nodded, suddenly awkward, and turned to enter the store. Behind her, she heard him say, I'll be in town for 2 more days, resting the horses. Perhaps I'll see you again. Sarah didn't respond, but as she took her place behind the counter, she found herself hoping that she would indeed see Adam Grant again before he continued his journey north. The day passed slowly, with few customers entering the store. By late afternoon, Sarah's thoughts had drifted repeatedly to the tall stranger and his magnificent horses. There was something comforting about his presence, a steadiness that reminded her of the mountains visible on the western horizon, enduring and unchanging. As closing time approached, the bell above the door jangled, and Sarah looked up to see Widow Jenkins enter, her round face flushed with excitement. Sarah Summers, why didn't you tell me about that handsome cowboy who helped you this morning? She demanded, bustling to the counter. The whole town's talking about how he faced down Samuel Price. Sarah sighed. Small-town gossip traveled faster than telegraph messages. He's just passing through, Mrs. Jenkins, heading to his brother's ranch in Wyoming. Well, he's certainly made an impression during his stay. Paid for 2 weeks' worth of feed for the Wilsons' milk cow after he heard they were struggling. The widow leaned closer. And he asked about you at dinner. Sarah's heart gave an unexpected leap. Asked what? Your circumstances, mostly. Whether you had family nearby, how long you'd been married to that no-good Frank. Mrs. Jenkins sniffed disapprovingly. I told him straight that you deserved better than a husband who'd abandon his wife for some fool's gold dream. Embarrassment flooded Sarah. Mrs. Jenkins, you had no right. Oh, hush, the older woman interrupted. That man's got kind eyes, Sarah, the sort that see things clear. He didn't judge. He just listened. She patted Sarah's hand. Sometimes Providence works in mysterious ways. Your husband leaves, and the very next day, a decent man with fine horses rides into town. It's not like that, Sarah protested, though she felt her cheeks warm. Mr. Grant was simply being neighborly. Mrs. Jenkins raised a knowing eyebrow. If you say so, dear. Now, I need some sugar and coffee, if you please. As Sarah gathered the widow's purchases, she tried to dismiss the older woman's romantic notions. Adam Grant was indeed kind, but he was also a man with his own path, heading to Wyoming while she needed to reach Junction City in the opposite direction. Their brief acquaintance was nothing more than a momentary intersection of 2 separate journeys. Yet, as she walked home that evening, Sarah found herself scanning the street for a glimpse of tall figure in a worn leather vest. She told herself it was merely curiosity, nothing more. The next morning broke with a spectacular sunrise that painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Sarah rose early and stood on her small porch, watching as the colors gradually faded to the clear blue of a perfect autumn day. For the first time since Frank's departure, she felt a glimmer of hope not for his return, but for her own future. After a quick breakfast, she decided to visit the small church at the edge of town. Though not particularly religious, Sarah found comfort in the quiet sanctuary, a place to gather her thoughts and consider her options. The building was empty when she arrived, the morning service still hours away. She sat in the last pew, the familiar smell of polished wood and old hymnals surrounding her. Through the simple stained glass windows, sunlight cast colored patterns on the worn floorboards. Sarah closed her eyes, seeking peace in the silence. The sound of the door opening caused her to turn. Adam Grant stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking momentarily surprised to find the church occupied. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not," Sarah assured him, gesturing to the empty pew beside her. "There's plenty of room for contemplation in here." He hesitated before entering, his boots making little sound on the floor as he moved to join her. There was something different about him today, a subtle tension in his shoulders, perhaps, or a carefulness in his movements that hadn't been present before. "I don't often find myself in churches," he admitted, sitting down at a respectful distance, "but sometimes a man needs a quiet place to think." "And what are you thinking about, Mr. Grant?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. He glanced at her, a half-smile touching his lips. "If I'm to call you Sarah, then surely I'm Adam to you." She nodded her acceptance of this. "I'm thinking," he continued, "about journeys, about how we plan our paths so carefully, only to find ourselves taking unexpected turns." He looked toward the simple wooden cross at the front of the church. "I was supposed to leave today." "What's changed?" Adam's fingers tapped lightly against his hat brim. "I had a letter from my brother last night, delivered by a ranch hand who was passing through. There's been an outbreak of fever at the ranch, nothing deadly. But he's asked me to delay bringing the horses until it passes." "I see," Sarah said, though she wasn't sure why this information should matter to her. "So you'll be staying in Cottonwood Creek longer than planned?" "A week, perhaps 2. Adam turned to face her directly. "Which brings me to a proposition I'd like to make." Sarah stiffened slightly, her guard rising instinctively. Adam noticed and raised a hand in reassurance. "Not that kind of proposition," he clarified quickly. "Mrs. Jenkins mentioned you're trying to reach your sister in Junction City." "She seems to have mentioned a great many things," Sarah replied, embarrassment coloring her voice. Adam had the grace to look slightly abashed. "The widow is enthusiastic about conversation. But in this case, her information has given me an idea that might benefit us both." Sarah raised an eyebrow, waiting. "I have 6 horses and only 1 me," he explained. "While I'm waiting for word from my brother, I could use the time to train the newer horses to the saddle. You need transportation to Junction City." He met her gaze directly. "I'd be willing to take you there, and then continue north when the time comes." The offer took Sarah by surprise. "That's very generous," she said cautiously. "But I couldn't possibly accept such—" "It's not charity," Adam interrupted. "Having a destination and purpose would give structure to the training, and frankly, I could use something productive to do while waiting." Sarah studied him, searching for any sign of ulterior motives in his clear blue eyes. She found none, only straightforward practicality and perhaps a hint of something that might have been hope. "People would talk," she said finally. "A woman traveling alone with a man she barely knows." Adam nodded in understanding. "We could leave separately and meet outside of town, and I give you my word as a gentleman that your reputation would be safe in my company." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Sarah found herself considering the proposal seriously. The alternative was to remain in Cottonwood Creek, stretching her meager savings while waiting for a stagecoach she might not be able to afford. The opportunity to reach her sister sooner, to start rebuilding her life, was tempting. "Let me think about it," she said finally. "Of course." Adam stood, settling his hat on his head. "I'll be at the livery stable most of today if you decide." He paused at the end of the pew. "Whatever you choose, I wish you well, Sarah Summers." She watched him leave, his tall figure silhouetted briefly against the bright light outside before the door closed behind him. In the stillness that followed, Sarah found herself facing a crossroads she hadn't anticipated. The safest choice was to stay, to follow the expected path for a woman in her situation. But something about Adam Grant inspired trust, and the prospect of a new beginning called to her like a distant horizon. Sarah remained in the church for nearly an hour, weighing her options. By the time she left, the sun was high in the sky, and her mind was made up. She walked directly to the general store, where Mr. Hoffman was arranging a display of canned goods. "I need to speak with you about something important," she told her employer. The elderly man listened patiently as Sarah explained her situation and Adam's offer. When she finished, he removed his spectacles and polished them thoughtfully. "You're asking my advice?" he inquired. "Yes," Sarah admitted. "You've always been fair and honest with me, Mr. Hoffman." He replaced his glasses and regarded her seriously. "Then I'll tell you what I think. I've been watching that young man since he arrived. He conducts himself with integrity, pays fair prices without complaint, treats others with respect." Mr. Hoffman paused. "I believe his offer is genuine and his intentions honorable. You don't think I'm being reckless? Life requires some risk, Sarah. Sometimes the bigger risk is doing nothing at all." The old shopkeeper smiled kindly. "Besides, you're a woman of good judgment. I trust you to make the right decision for yourself." His confidence bolstered her resolve. After discussing the details of her departure from the store, Sarah left to make her preparations. She would need to pack her belongings, write to her sister, and settle her affairs in Cottonwood Creek, all without drawing undue attention to her plans. By late afternoon, Sarah had accomplished most of her tasks. Her few possessions were packed into 2 small trunks, her rent was paid through the end of the month, and a letter to her sister was sealed and ready for the next mail coach. All that remained was to inform Adam of her decision. The livery stable was quiet when Sarah arrived, most of the town's meager traffic having concluded for the day. She found Adam in one of the rear stalls, brushing down the chestnut mare she had admired the previous day. He looked up at her approach, his expression carefully neutral. "I've been thinking about your offer," Sarah began without preamble. "And?" There was no pressure in his tone, just simple inquiry. "I accept, with conditions." Sarah stood straight, meeting his gaze directly. "We'll travel as acquaintances, nothing more. I'll contribute to our expenses from my savings, and when we reach Junction City, we'll part ways with no obligations on either side." Adam set down the brush and stepped out of the stall, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Those terms seem fair," he agreed. "I'd add only that your safety will be my priority throughout the journey, and that I'll conduct myself with the respect you deserve." Sarah nodded, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. In the dim light of the stable, Adam's eyes seemed deeper, the lines of his face more defined. He smelled of leather and horses and open-air scents that spoke of freedom and wide horizons. "When would you like to leave?" he asked, breaking the moment. "The day after tomorrow," Sarah decided. "I've arranged things at the store, and that will give me time to finish my preparations. Then I'll meet you at sunrise, 2 miles south of town where the creek bends around the old lightning-struck oak. Do you know it?" Sarah nodded. The spot he described was a local landmark, visible from the road but set back enough to provide privacy. "Thank you," she said simply. "This means more than I can say." Adam's expression softened. "Everyone deserves a chance to find their path, Sarah. Sometimes we just need a little help along the way." As she turned to leave, he called after her softly, "Bring warm clothing. The nights get cold on the open trail." With those practical words, their pact was sealed. Sarah walked back to her small home, her heart lighter than it had been in days. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also possibility, a journey not of her choosing, but perhaps leading to the future she needed. The following day passed in a flurry of final preparations. Sarah visited the general store to collect her last wages and say goodbye to Mr. Hoffman, who pressed upon her a package of coffee and dried fruit for the journey. She stopped by the church to leave a donation from her meager savings, a gesture of gratitude for the peace she had found there. And finally, she walked through the small house that had been her home, touching familiar objects one last time before closing the door on that chapter of her life. She slept little that night, her mind filled with both anticipation and doubt. Was she being foolish to trust a man she barely knew? What awaited her at her sister's home? Would she find the new beginning she sought, or merely trade one form of dependence for another? When the first pale light of dawn crept through her window, Sarah rose and dressed in her sturdiest clothes, a brown riding skirt, high-necked blouse, and sturdy boots. She braided her auburn hair tightly and covered it with a wide-brimmed hat for protection against the sun. After one final glance around the bedroom, She picked up her two small trunks and stepped out into the cool morning air. The streets were deserted as she made her way south, out of town. No one witnessed her departure, a small blessing for which she was grateful. The weight of her trunks grew heavier as she walked, but Sarah pressed on, determination in every step. This was her choice, her path forward, and she would not falter now. The old lightning-struck oak came into view as the sun cleared the eastern horizon, its twisted branches reaching toward the sky like gnarled fingers. And there, waiting in its shadow, was Adam Grant, with 7 horses, his 6 thoroughbreds, and a sturdy bay mare saddled and ready. "Good morning," he called as she approached, coming forward to take her trunks. "You're right on time." Sarah watched as he secured her belongings behind the bay mare's saddle. "Is this one of your brother's horses?" she asked, indicating the bay. Adam shook his head. "This is Penny. She belongs to me. Raised her from a foal." There was unmistakable affection in his voice as he patted the horse's neck. "She's steady and sure-footed, perfect for you if you're not an experienced rider." Sarah approached the mare cautiously, allowing the animal to sniff her hand. "Hello, Penny," she said softly. The horse nickered gently, nudging Sarah's palm in greeting. "She likes you," Adam observed, a smile touching his lips. "That's a good sign." He adjusted the stirrups to accommodate Sarah's height. "Have you ridden much?" "Some, when I was younger," Sarah admitted. "It's been a while, though." "We'll take it slow at first," he promised, offering his cupped hands to help her mount. Sarah placed her boot in his palms and swung up into the saddle, adjusting her skirt for comfort. The sensation of being on horseback again was both foreign and familiar. The height, the gentle sway, the living creature beneath her responding to her movements. Adam checked to ensure she was securely settled before mounting his own horse, a powerful black stallion that seemed to embody controlled strength. With the string of thoroughbreds tied together and trailing behind, they set off along the road heading east, the rising sun warming their backs. "Next stop, Junction City," Adam said, tipping his hat with a smile that made Sarah's heart flutter unexpectedly. "Your new beginning awaits, madam." Sarah smiled back, feeling a sense of lightness she hadn't experienced in years. Whatever lay ahead, at this moment she was free, riding toward the horizon with nothing but open sky above and possibilities stretching out before her. The first day of travel passed pleasantly enough, though Sarah's muscles protested the unaccustomed exercise. Adam set a gentle pace, mindful of her inexperience and the need to conserve the horse's energy for the long journey ahead. They followed the main road, occasionally encountering wagons or other travelers, all of whom Adam greeted with a polite nod but gave no opportunity for extended conversation. "Best to avoid questions about our travels," he explained when Sarah asked about his reticence. "People remember a woman traveling with a man who's not her husband. I'd prefer not to invite speculation that might follow you to Junction City." His consideration touched Sarah, reinforcing her growing belief that she had made the right decision in accepting his offer. As they rode side by side, Adam shared stories of his years working with horses, first on his father's small farm in Missouri, then later as a cavalry horse trainer during the war, and finally as his brother's partner in the Wyoming breeding operation. "What about you?" he asked as they stopped to rest the horses beside a clear running stream. "How did a shopkeeper's daughter end up in Cottonwood Creek?" Sarah trailed her fingers through the cool water, considering her answer. "My father owned a general store in Springfield," she began. "He taught me the business from the time I could count inventory. I thought I'd follow in his footsteps someday." She smiled wryly. "Then Frank Summers came to town, full of charm and big dreams about the opportunities out west." "And you fell in love," Adam guessed. "I was 19 and naive," Sarah corrected. "What I felt was more infatuation than love, though I didn't recognize the difference then. Frank was handsome and confident, promising a grand adventure." Her smile faded. "By the time we reached Nebraska, the adventure had lost its shine. The boom Frank expected in Cottonwood Creek never materialized, and he grew restless, then bitter." Adam listened attentively, his expression thoughtful. "Yet you stayed 7 years. I kept hoping things would improve, that Frank would settle, that we might build something together." Sarah shrugged. "Instead, he gambled away most of what we earned and drank away much of the rest. When he left, I think he was doing us both a favor, though I couldn't see it that way at first. You deserved better, Adam said simply. Perhaps, Sarah replied, but regret is a poor companion on life's journey. I prefer to look ahead now. Adam smiled, the expression warming his eyes. A wise philosophy, Sarah Summers. They made camp that evening in a small grove of cottonwoods, far enough from the road to ensure privacy, but close enough to the stream to provide water. Adam efficiently set about making a fire, while Sarah arranged their supplies for cooking. Working together in the gathering dusk, they fell into a comfortable rhythm, as though they had camped together many times before. Sarah prepared a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and biscuits, while Adam tended to the horses, ensuring each was properly fed and secured for the night. As they sat by the fire eating their dinner, the stars emerged overhead, brilliant against the darkening sky. The night sounds of the prairie surrounded them, the gentle rustling of leaves, the occasional call of a night bird, the soft nickering of the horses. "It's beautiful out here," Sarah observed, gazing upward at the vast expanse of stars. "I'd forgotten how magnificent the night sky can be away from town lights." "One of the reasons I prefer open country," Adam agreed. "A man can breathe out here, think his own thoughts without the press of other people's expectations." Sarah studied him across the fire, his features highlighted by the dancing flames. "Is that why you choose to travel alone? To avoid expectations?" Adam considered her question thoughtfully. "Partly," he admitted. "I've always valued my independence, but also—" He hesitated, as if deciding how much to reveal. "I lost someone during the war. After that, it seemed easier to keep moving, to avoid forming attachments that could lead to more pain." "I'm sorry," Sarah said softly, understanding now the occasional shadow that crossed his face. "Was she your wife?" "Fiancée," Adam corrected. "Emily and I were to marry when I returned. Influenza took her in the winter of '63 while I was serving with the Union Cavalry." His voice was steady, the grief long since tempered by time, but Sarah could hear the echo of old pain beneath his words. After that, the thought of settling in one place, building a life with someone else, just didn't seem possible anymore. "Yet you're helping your brother establish his ranch," Sarah pointed out. "That suggests some desire for roots." Adam smiled faintly. "Michael's the one with the dream. I'm just the hired hand who happens to share his blood." He tossed another small branch onto the fire. "What about you? What awaits in Junction City besides your sister?" "A fresh start," Sarah replied. "Charlotte married a banker there. They have a comfortable life, and she's written several times offering me a place with them." She stared into the flames, contemplating the future. "I have some skills, bookkeeping, retail management. Perhaps I'll find work in one of the town shops." "Is that what you want? To work in another shop?" The question gave Sarah pause. In truth, she hadn't thought much beyond escaping Cottonwood Creek and the painful memories it held. "I'm not sure what I want anymore," she admitted. "For so long, my life was defined by Frank's wishes, his plans. Now," she shrugged, "I suppose I'll discover my own desires along the way." Adam nodded, understanding in his gaze. Sometimes the journey itself reveals the destination. They lapsed into comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them as the night deepened around their small camp. When it came time to sleep, Adam arranged their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, close enough for safety, but with proper distance maintained. As he had promised, his conduct was impeccably respectful, yet Sarah found herself aware of his presence in a way that both unsettled and intrigued her. "Rest well," he said as he settled onto his bedroll. "Tomorrow will be a longer day of riding." "Good night, Adam," Sarah replied, pulling her blanket up against the cool night air. She lay awake for some time, listening to the rhythmic sound of his breathing and wondering at the strange turns of fate that had brought her to this moment camping beneath the stars with a man who was still largely a stranger, yet who had already shown her more consideration than her husband had in years. Sleep eventually claimed her, deep and dreamless, the most peaceful rest she had experienced since Frank's departure. The following days fell into a pattern as they traveled eastward across the Nebraska plains. Each morning they rose at dawn, shared a simple breakfast, and broke camp efficiently before continuing their journey. Adam proved to be a patient teacher, offering advice on riding technique that made Sarah's time in the saddle more comfortable. By the third day, she found herself enjoying the rhythm of travel, the changing landscapes, and the freedom of the open road. They avoided larger settlements, stopping instead at isolated farmhouses to replenish supplies when necessary. At each such stop, Adam introduced Sarah as his cousin, traveling to visit family, a harmless fiction that prevented awkward questions while maintaining her reputation. On the fifth day of their journey, as they crossed a shallow ford in a small tributary of the Platte River, Adam suddenly raised his hand, signaling Sarah to halt. "What is it?" she asked, scanning the surrounding terrain for any sign of danger. Adam pointed toward a distant plume of dust rising from the prairie to the south. "Riders coming fast," he said, his voice calm but alert. "Could be nothing, but best to be cautious." He guided their small party into a stand of willows that provided cover while allowing them to observe the approaching riders. As the group drew nearer, Sarah counted 5 men, riding hard and direct in their path. "Trouble?" she whispered, noting the way Adam's hand had drifted to rest on his holstered gun. "Possibly," he replied, his gaze never leaving the approaching riders. "Stay close and let me do the talking." When the riders were within 50 yards, Adam nudged his mount forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Sarah while keeping the string of thoroughbreds behind them both. His posture was relaxed but watchful as the men pulled their lathered horses to a stop before them. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Adam greeted them casually. "You seem to be in a hurry." The leader of the group, a hard-faced man with a week's growth of beard, narrowed his eyes as he assessed Adam, Sarah, and the horses. "Looking for a woman traveling east," he said bluntly. "Seen anyone matching that description?" Sarah felt a chill run through her, though she maintained a neutral expression. Could Frank have sent men after her? Or was this some unrelated matter? "Can't say that I have," Adam replied easily. "My cousin and I have had the trail to ourselves since yesterday." He gestured toward Sarah with a slight nod. "We're heading to Junction City to visit family." The man's gaze shifted to Sarah, his eyes lingering long enough to make her uncomfortable. "Your cousin, huh?" His tone suggested disbelief. "Yes," Adam confirmed, his voice hardening slightly. "Is there a problem?" The rider glanced at the thoroughbreds strung out behind them. "Fine-looking horseflesh you got there. Worth a pretty penny, I'd wager." "They're not for sale," Adam stated firmly, echoing his words to Samuel Price days earlier. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we'd like to make a few more miles before sunset." A tense silence followed as the leader seemed to weigh his options. Sarah held her breath, acutely aware of the isolation of their position and the odds against them if these men decided to press the issue. Finally, the man spat to one side and jerked his head in a reluctant nod. "We'll be moving on, then. You see a lone woman on the trail. About her age." He tilted his head toward Sarah. "With red hair, you tell her Jed Hollis wants his money back." "I'll be sure to pass that along," Adam agreed smoothly. "Good day to you." The riders wheeled their horses around and galloped away, heading east along the trail. Adam remained motionless until they were well out of sight before turning to Sarah. "You know who they're looking for?" he asked. Sarah shook her head. "No, but I'm relieved it wasn't me they sought." "As am I," Adam admitted, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "But I don't like the look of them. We'll avoid the main trail for a while, just to be safe." They altered their course, taking a less traveled route that added miles to their journey but decreased the likelihood of encountering the riders again. As they rode side by side through tall prairie grass, Sarah found herself studying Adam's profile, noting the alertness in his posture and the careful way he scanned their surroundings. "You've dealt with men like that before," she observed. Adam glanced at her, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "The war taught me to recognize trouble, and working with valuable horses attracts its share of unwanted attention." "I'm glad you're here," Sarah said impulsively, then flushed slightly at her own candor. Adam's expression softened. "So am I, Sarah. So am I." That evening, they made camp in a sheltered hollow that provided good protection from both the elements and prying eyes. Adam took extra precautions, setting up their fire in a depression that minimized its visibility while still providing warmth. As they prepared their evening meal, Sarah noticed him wincing slightly when he lifted the coffee pot. "Are you injured?" she asked, concerned. "Old wound acting up," he dismissed with a shrug. Nothing serious. Sarah wasn't convinced. Let me see, she insisted, moving to his side. After a moment's hesitation, Adam rolled up his left sleeve, revealing a jagged scar that ran from his elbow halfway up his upper arm. Saber cut at Gettysburg, he explained. Healed well enough, but it bothers me sometimes when the weather's changing. Sarah examined the scar with gentle fingers. A storm's coming, she murmured, glancing at the clear sky overhead. Your arm's a better weather predictor than any almanac. Adam laughed softly. One of its few useful qualities these days. Without thinking, Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out a small tin of salve. My mother's recipe, she explained, opening the container, for aches and sprains. When Adam offered no objection, she applied the salve to his scarred arm, her touch careful and therapeutic. The intimacy of the moment wasn't lost on either of them, her hands on his skin, his breath steady but measured as he watched her work. Thank you, he said quietly when she finished, rolling down his sleeve. It feels better already. Their eyes met across the small space between them, and Sarah felt something shift, a subtle change in the atmosphere, a recognition of connection that went beyond their practical arrangement. Adam must have felt it too, for he cleared his throat and moved back slightly, creating a respectable distance once more. We should reach Junction City in 3 more days if the weather holds, he said, returning to safer conversational ground. Your sister will be surprised to see you. I sent a letter from the last farm where we stopped, Sarah reminded him, though I doubt it will reach her before we do. The reminder of their destination and the approaching end of their journey cast a sudden shadow over Sarah's mood. In less than a week, she had grown accustomed to Adam's company, to the rhythm of their days together, to the quiet conversations by firelight. The prospect of saying goodbye felt unexpectedly difficult. What will you do after you deliver me to Junction City? She asked, striving for a casual tone. Continue north to your brother's ranch? Adam nodded, poking at the fire with a stick. That's the plan. If the fever is past, I'll take the horses to Wyoming as intended. He glanced up at her. Though I admit, this detour has been more pleasant than I anticipated. The simple acknowledgement warmed Sarah more than the fire before her. For me as well, she admitted softly. Neither spoke of the growing affection between them, the unacknowledged attraction that made each shared glance and casual touch more meaningful. Sarah told herself it was natural 2 lonely people finding comfort in each other's company during a journey. Nothing more, nothing less. But as she lay in her bedroll that night, listening to the first distant rumbles of the storm Adam's old wound had predicted, Sarah acknowledged the truth she had been avoiding. She was falling in love with Adam Grant, a man she had known for barely a week, whose life was as different from hers as the mountains were from the prairie. The realization brought both joy and trepidation. Joy in the discovery that her heart could still feel such emotion after the disappointments of her marriage, trepidation at the thought of what such feelings might mean for her carefully constructed plans for independence. The storm broke shortly before dawn, bringing sheets of rain that forced them to remain in camp longer than usual. They sheltered beneath a hastily constructed lean-to, watching as the downpour turned the prairie into a sea of mud and swaying grass. No traveling today, Adam observed, handing Sarah a cup of coffee. Not with the ground like this, the horses would struggle, especially with the extra weight they're carrying. Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her cold fingers around the warm tin cup. Will this delay set us back much? A day, perhaps 2 if the rain continues. Adam settled beside her. Close enough for warmth, but maintaining a proper distance. Your sister won't mind waiting a little longer, I imagine. No, Sarah agreed. Charlotte's patient by nature. It's one of her virtues. They fell into comfortable conversation as the rain continued, speaking of their childhoods, their dreams before life had taken unexpected turns, their favorite books and memories. The enforced idleness of the stormy day allowed for a deepening of their acquaintance in ways that the focused activity of travel had not. As afternoon approached and the rain finally began to slacken, Adam stretched his legs and regarded Sarah thoughtfully. You know, I've been thinking about what you said about discovering your own desires. Sarah raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. What did you love doing as a child? Before responsibilities and expectations shaped your choices? The question caught her off guard. I suppose. I loved working with my hands, creating things. She smiled at the memory. My mother taught me to sew, not just practical mending, but beautiful things, embroidery, quilting. I had a knack for it. Did you continue after you married? Sarah's smile faded. Frank thought it frivolous, a waste of time that could be better spent on practical matters. She shrugged. Eventually I stopped. Adam's expression darkened momentarily. A man who discourages his wife's talents is a fool, he said quietly. Beauty and practicality aren't mutually exclusive. The simple validation of her interests touched Sarah deeply. Perhaps in Junction City I'll take it up again, she mused. Charlotte always admired my needlework. I think you should, Adam encouraged. Skills like that are valued in growing communities. You might even build a business around it eventually. The suggestion planted a seed in Sarah's mind, a possibility she hadn't considered before. Could her handiwork provide not just personal satisfaction, but a means of supporting herself? The idea was both exciting and intimidating. I'll think about it, she promised, grateful for his belief in her abilities. The rain finally stopped as evening approached, leaving behind a freshly washed world of glistening grasses and clear air. They emerged from their shelter to tend the horses who had weathered the storm stoically under a stand of trees. As they worked side by side, checking hooves for mud and ensuring all was in order, Sarah found herself acutely aware of Adam's presence, the careful competence of his hands, the occasional brush of his arm against hers, the clean scent of rain on his skin. When their tasks were complete, they stood together, watching the sunset paint the rain-washed sky in spectacular hues of orange and pink. Beautiful, isn't it? Adam murmured, standing close beside her. Yes, Sarah agreed, though her gaze had shifted from the sky to his profile. Beautiful indeed. He turned to find her watching him, and something in her expression must have revealed her thoughts, for his eyes widened slightly before softening with unmistakable warmth. For a breathless moment, Sarah thought he might kiss her, and more surprising still, she realized she wanted him to. Instead, Adam gently touched her cheek with calloused fingers before stepping back, respect evident in his restrained gesture. We should prepare dinner, he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. It'll be an early start tomorrow if the ground dries enough overnight. Sarah nodded, both disappointed and relieved by his restraint. This journey, their time together, had a defined endpoint. To complicate it with deeper feelings would only make their inevitable parting more difficult. Better to maintain the boundaries they had established for both their sakes. Yet as they moved about their evening tasks, Sarah couldn't help but wonder what might happen if those boundaries were to blur, if the connection growing between them were acknowledged and explored. The possibility both thrilled and frightened her. A testament to how much had changed in the short time since she had watched Frank ride away with their horse and savings, leaving her alone and adrift. Now, barely 2 weeks later, she was traveling toward a new beginning in the company of a man who had shown her more consideration and respect in days than Frank had in years. A man whose quiet strength and integrity had begun to heal wounds she hadn't fully recognized until they started to mend.